Good morning, Rabbi Say. So, 2 weeks ago already, we spoke about Saras, if it's contagious, if it's not contagious, and Bisman Hazeh, etc. And I thought to spin off into a shtickle series about contagious diseases and contagion bichlal and epidemics and what do you say? Oh yeah, and whatever. Everyone of us, for better or for worse, unfortunately, has lived through a proper epidemic. You know what I'm saying? Up till recently, these were shilas that seemed very obscure. Now everyone's lived through a proper epidemic in their life. So a lot of these shilas, we have preconceived notions and some personal experience. So I want to go into that a little bit. Now, I think I'm going to start with one particular epidemic, and it's a Shailah. It's an epidemic that started about 100 years ago, and it's a Shailah that animated some of the biggest minds in Klal Yisrael for the 100 years since then. Meaning, many Gedolei Yisrael, whether they were actually asked this Shailah halach l'maisa negay to them, or whether they were just, tchotchking zich with the Shailah later on, it animated them. They like to talk about this Shailah. Now, just to give the background, in the early 1900s, like in 1916 or 17, in 1909 they discovered how to test for typhus. Everyone's heard of typhus, right? It's a terrible disease. Today it's come out non-existent in the world, but everyone's heard of typhus in context of World War I, World War II. In 1909, doctors discovered how to test for typhus, and that's the earliest recorded records of typhus existing in Europe. Now, in Germany this wasn't common. It was a Polish disease. Typhus was common in Poland. In Germany there came out no typhus, and German doctors didn't really deal with typhus bichlal. Now, in 1916 is the first epidemic in Poland that happens with typhus. It's right towards the beginning of World War I. There starts an epidemic of typhus, and then over the next few years through World War I, it explodes. The epidemic of typhus explodes in Poland, and particularly in the Jewish communities, in the Jewish ghettos. Now, the Jews were so destroyed during World War II that we don't even really talk about what happened to the Jews into World War I. But World War I was quite a hard event for Klal Yisrael too. And many tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Jews were displaced, were living in ghettos and tiny cramped apartments on top of each other. And because of that, these epidemics, these viruses that were spreading, in particular latched on in the Jewish community. Ad kedei that the typhus epidemic was referred to in many of the papers of the day as the Jewish epidemic. Now, there is a whole scholarship. We've talked about this briefly in the past. It's not really something we'll talk about, but this is the study of anti-Semitism. Meaning, and you really could map it out all the way from the beginning of Klal Yisrael's existence, all the way throughout. And anti-Semitism is like Peshet Tzura v'Levish Tzura. It starts one way, then it morphs into something different. The taina always changes. Sometimes they hate us because we're rich. Sometimes they hate us because we're poor. Sometimes because we participate. Sometimes because we don't participate. It's sometimes because we're communists. Sometimes because we're capitalist. And these are just some of the recent ones. But originally, anti-Semitism that Jews dealt with for the longest time was just religious. The church hated Jews, and Ashkenazi Jews dealt with it in the Crusades, and Sephardi Jews dealt with it during the Inquisition, and that was like the bulk of it. Now, at some point, and we talked about this when we were talking about some of the Gemara, some of the Chesaria Sashas and Tainus and the Gemara, the anti-Semitism switched from religious anti-Semitism to a racist anti-Semitism, like that Jews are an inferior species, like the Nazi anti-Semitism that really bloomed during World War II. Now, one of the earliest times that this form of anti-Semitism took root was in 1918. The German government, who at that point was officially on the record not anti-Semitic, and had tens of thousands of Polish Jewish workers working in Germany, aiding the war effort in World War I for the German side, passed a law that no Jews are allowed to come from Poland to Germany. And the rationale given for this law was because they're bringing typhus. It's the typhus epidemic. Now, the German army, who controlled big swaths of Poland at that time, made 300 and something delousing stations, and essentially the earliest form of concentration camps were built during World War I by the Germans to police Jews who were sick. They were like prison conditions, and they had very subsistence food, and they weren't really wasting too much money in them because they thought they were going to die anyhow. And it's a whole sugya, but meaning a lot of the earliest strands of how the German anti-Semitism developed and really turned into in World War II started by the typhus epidemic in World War I. Now, one of the main components of how they dealt with the contagion of typhus was as follows. Anybody who was taken into a typhus hospital or a typhus ward or a typhus camp or whatever it was, the rule was as follows. You'd come with whatever limited possessions you came with, and whatever possessions you came with would stay there. everything you came with would be burnt. Your shirt, your pants, everything you came with was burnt. And this was actually very, very troubling for many of the Jews who were like blindingly poor at that time, had nothing. And if you lost your clothing, you lost, and so obviously it's a big shayla. Should you bring your Shabbos rekel if you're going to Typhus Dilausin camp, because you're going to lose it? But the bigger shayla, and this is the shayla that animated many Chachmei Yisrael throughout this next 100 years, is as follows: a Jewish man who has typhus, who's going to be interred in a typhus camp for X amount of months until he's cured, is he allowed to bring his tefillin? L'maisa, he has, let's for example say it's 4 weeks. So he has 6 days a week times 4 weeks. It's whatever. Run the numbers. It's many chiyuvei aseh. It's a mitzvah every single day. Tefillin, Chazal tell us, it's shakel keneged this and shakel keneged that. It's a mitzvah chashuva ma'od. It's a very, very big important mitzvah. Mitzad sheni, he knows without a doubt that at the end of his stay in this typhus camp, they're going to confiscate his tefillin along with the rest of his clothing and burn it in the incinerator to make sure that the germs don't spread. And the nidin is do you say prioritize the mitzvah of tefillin? I have to wear tefillin. I have to do what I have to do. I have to bring tefillin. I have to wear tefillin. The fact that later on a non-Jew will come and he'll burn my tefillin, not my concern. That's kach gazer ritzayne yisbarach. That's not my concern. Or do you say no? You know that by bringing your tefillin to this typhus camp, you're automatically subjecting it to being burnt. It's just a matter of time. The rules are the rules. It's not going to change, and therefore don't bring your tefillin to camp, even if you don't have to put on tefillin. Now, this is a shayla that I don't know, probably a half a dozen Gedolei Hadar debated extensively. Meaning, of course, there's hundreds of Talmidei Chachamim and people who wrote in an article here, in all the earliest kavitzim, like from the 1920s in Krakow. They're writing about it all the way spanning to like Kavitz Pamei Yaakov in Bnei Brak in 2010, and then again in 2020 by the I mean, these shaylas have come again, but Lamashal, there's a tshuva about it from the Koich of Yaakov, the Chabina, the David Misharov and his brother the Koich of Yaakov, both of them, two Gaonim, Gaane HaGaonim, Galiciana Gaonim, they wrote tshuvas about it. Moshe has a tshuva about it. Hutner talked about it. Gifter talked about it. Minchas Yitzchak talked about it. It's like Mamish, the Remeir Simcha spoke about it. There's so many of the Gedolei Yisrael throughout the Deiros were animated by the Shailah, and I wanted to share a few of the rayas Lakan Lakan. Kanireh, the halacha is not to. Just in case you leave now and you want to know what the bottom line is. Kanireh, the halacha, the consensus of the Paiskim is not to wear the tefillin, not to bring the tefillin in. But let's just talk about the rayas Lakan Lakan. Now I want to start with I'm going to go in chronological order of who discusses the Shailah. Not based on chashivas and not based on which tshuvas are the most consequential. I'm just going to go in chronological order. Like, when you see a lot of rabbis on a paper, I'm going in alphabetical order over here. It's not, no conclusion should be drawn. So there's a tshuva sefer called Imri David from a Litvish Rav. I think a Litvish Rav. It could be a Polish actually. Maybe a Polish in the 1920s in Poland. And he writes as follows. He says, Hanoichi b'derech nachani Hashem l'poi merchas Triskevitz. I'm traveling and I ended up in the bathhouses of Triskevitz. V'yisapru lanu, and this is the shmooze that's happening in the Schwitz over here. V'yisapru lanu ki haya Shailah ben haleimdim u'poiser einitam. There's a Shailah between the leimdim that was raised, and no one has an answer. V'yir Krakow navoicha. The city of Krakow is confused. Im lehaimin or lahasmil u'bikashti l'chavadayti gamani. V'zet toichan ha-Shailah. He says they told me they're not sure to go right, to go left. This is the nidin, and here I'm going to tell you my opinion. He says, Ish echad yirei Hashem. A person, an Erlich Yid, who fell ill and became infected with the disease of typhus, he has to be confined to an infectious disease hospital the next month or two. And he's asking if they could send him his tefillin. Eis Yaakov v'Yishalach b'chutz v'Shailim Rashoyim Anulasas Kain. Are we allowed to send him his tefillin? He says the rule in the hospital is that when you leave, everything gets burnt. This man is going to be there for another 2 months. He wants his tefillin. Can we send it or not? Now, it's an interesting tshuva. He brings in quick succession like 10 chazals in each side, and I'll read it and try to just open them up as we're going along. It says l'chayra nira. They ain't on the Rashoyim lasas leit tefillin. We can't give him his tefillin. V'achich yisuvais, and then they're going to get burnt. Chalila. If you give the tefillin and you allow them to get burnt, it's as if you yourself are subjecting them to be burnt, and you're over l'sasan ken l'Hashem l'keichem. He says, here's raya number 1. Shaul asher hikes hagevonim. The Gemara in Vivamas Tafayin Vavam Beis tells us about a famine that came to Klal Yisrael. It's really based on Psukim and Malachim. And David HaMelech asks what went wrong, and Hashem tells him, I have some outstanding tinus on Klal Yisrael that need to be resolved. And one of them was a Shailah Shehika b'Gevainim. Shaul killed the Gevainim. Now the Gemara over there explains to us that Shaul didn't kill a single Gevaini. Shaul killed the city of Noiv, and there were Gevaini merchants who used to make their parnasa selling things to Noiv. And because of the ripple effect, Shaul kills Noiv. Noiv takes away the parnasa of the Gevainim. Hashem comes back to David HaMelech and says, I have to settle that debt. So he says, you see, that something that has a direct cause and effect, like a direct chain, and it comes because of something, it's as if you did it yourself, you're responsible for it. Sanhedrin Tzaddik, he says, it says, the Gemara Sanhedrin Tzaddik, that says, Hashem had a taina on David HaMelech for Noiv, for the city of Noiv itself, even though Shaul killed Noiv, David didn't kill Noiv. Again, you see, direct consequences, things that can be tied back to you, you're responsible for. Then he continues and he says as follows, Baba Basra Chaf Man Aleph, and this is an interesting one. The Gemara in Baba Basra Chaf Aleph tells a story of, I forget the name now, the second, of an Amira who had a sharp tongue and he had interactions with many different Amiraim, and eventually he dies young, and each one of the three Amiraim who recently had a sharp interaction with him say, I'm the one who killed him and I need to do tshuva. Meaning it's my Kpeda that killed him. So he said, you see from this Gemara that each one of them was directly connecting their actions and saying, I'm mechuyev for killing him. I'm on the hook for killing him. I have to do something about it. So you see, if you know that there's a cause and effect, what you do is causing an outcome, you're mechuyev to settle it. You have the responsibility for that, he says. Then he says, weiter, fine. This he says, these are his rayas that he starts off. Then he says as follows, but Lamaisa, there's a famous Gemara. The Gemara in Brachas and Daf Yod says as follows: Amalei Yishaya l'Chizkiya. Yishaya told Chizkiya, "Mois Tamas." Right. This is the Chizkiya's what do you call it? A Baal Tshuva king, a king who brought Klal Yisrael around and made a tremendous Tshuva revolution. And out of the blue, he falls ill, and Yishaya Navi comes and tells him, "Mois Tamas, you're going to die." And the Gemara dashens Mois Ba'ilam Hazeh, Tamus Ba'ilam Haba. You're going to die and be totally eradicated. And Yishai and Chizkiya and Shak turns to Yishai and he says, what could I have done that's so terribly wrong? I brought Klal Yisrael around. I did everything I'm supposed to. So he tells him, you didn't marry a wife. You're supposed to be Mekayim mitzvah pruvu, and you neglected to do that mitzvah. Amalei chazina dahavale binin delei mali. So Chizkiyahu tells Yishaya, I saw b'ruach HaKodesh b'nevuah that I'm going to have kids that are going to be terrible kids. They're not going to be good kids. And here Yishaya tells him this famous line that everybody knows. He says, Amalei b'hadi kavshi d'rachman alamalach. You need to make Hashem's cheshbainis. Ma demifkedach asay. Whatever you're mechuyev to do, you should do. And b'hadi kavshi d'rachman alamalach. It's not your problem to make Hashem's cheshbainis. So says the Imri David, he wants to suggest, maybe this is similar. Maybe you see, you have a mitzvah to say to put on tefillin. There's a mitzvah to put on tefillin. You don't have to make Hashem's cheshbainis. Hashem, the tefillin's going to get burnt. It's not your problem. And he says, "Be'emes, heitev ashedi b'Chizkiya." Chizkiya was very correct. Chizkiya's son was Menashe, who was the longest reigning and most damaging king to Klal Yisrael. He was Maimin Atzelim in the Heichel. Ayin Sanhedrin Tzaddik Tes, Yom Avav Medbeis, Dam Naki Shafach. He killed a lot of people. So. He says, he says, Yishaya gave him Musa and said, no, that's not the way to do it, you have to have a child. Then he continues and he brings a few more of these rayas that, and this is a fascinating one. He says like this, he says, if you look through Nevi'im, there's nevuas throughout Klal Yisrael's history that are predicting that the Beis HaMikdash is going to be destroyed. From the earliest points of Hashem talking about the Beis HaMikdash, and there's many midrashim, Ma'amar Chazal, midrashim that talk about, the Psukim say, the pasuk says, one second, it says, the pasuk in Melachim Aleph Tes, it says, Amar Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem. Chazal Darshan, the Gemara Nazir Darshan from that, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, so that the first bottom are Asidim Leichariv. There's going to be two Beis HaMikdashes that are going to be destroyed, and then the third one will be the Heichal Hashem. And this is Chazal is replete with this. There's many Makaris, there's Rashis and Chumash, there's everywhere Chazal that are brought that at different inflection points, we already knew that the Beis HaMikdash is going to be destroyed. It says, Hagatz, I don't understand. How do you go build the Beis HaMikdash? You go build the Beis HaMikdash, someone else could destroy it? That's the same as bringing tefillin into the Typhus ward. He says, Elamai, the teretz is, you have a mitzvah to do what you're supposed to do. You focus on what you're supposed to do right now. What's going to happen later, that's not your problem. Now, obviously, it's very easy to understand that this is not a great raya, and you can make chilukim, right? And Hashem's in charge of when and if the Beis HaMikdash will get destroyed, and therefore, it's possible that Hashem will accept, and throughout the Nevi'im we definitely see there's a conversation happening about will the Beis HaMikdash be destroyed, when the Beis HaMikdash will be destroyed. So the raya is interessant raya, but he brings that raya. Then he brings another interesting raya.
It's the same thing about the Typhus word. I think it could be
Yeah. It's much more direct, though. When you're talking about a 6-week stint in a hospital with exact legal restrictions that the government placed, it's much more likely that it's going to be carried out. Then he has another eye. He has the famous Gemara of Avodah Zarah. The Gemara of Avodah Zarah, Daf Chesed Aleph, tells us a story of Rav Chanina bar Tradin Shayamakil Kehilas Barabim. Right, he would gather Kehilas Barabim b'Sefer Torah b'Yadai, and he had a Sefer Torah in his hand. So it says when he went to visit Rav Yehuda ben Tema, I think. No, who did he visit? I forgot who. When he went to visit, and he says, I don't understand. Don't you understand that the Romans are here because Hashem put them in charge? And they made a law that you're not allowed to learn Torah in the street. What are you doing over here? And he says, Rav Chanina ben Tradin says, what does he say? He says, Tamei anim lo yisrafu lo yischav v'sefer Torah be'esh. He says, I'm Tamei if they're not going to burn you in the Sefer Torah in the fire. But Afal Pikein, Rav Chanina ben Tradin went out with the Sefer Torah b'yad and he went to learn. So he says, Mistama, there was knowledge already. People were talking and they were saying, the Romans were talking and people knew that this was coming. And Afal Pikein, Rav Chanina ben Tradin said, my job is to do what I'm supposed to do. I have to go say shir with the Sefer Torah, and if it ends up happening that the Sefer Torah gets nisraf and I get nisraf, that's not my problem. That's Hashem's decision. And Tachak Kachave, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah tells us, Rav Chanina ben Tradin was taken out, and they wrapped him in the Sefer Torah, they burnt him with the Sefer Torah, etc. It says here's a whole bunch of rayas. He says l'chayra that a person is mechuyev to do what he's mechuyev to do. You have a mitzvah, you do the mitzvahs that you're mechuyev to do, and the fact that later on there's going to be some sort of downstream ramifications, you're not responsible for that. Even if it seems pretty direct, even if it seems like it's mamish, not negotiable, even if it seems like it's sure going to happen, you're not responsible for the downstream ramifications of your actions. When it comes to mitzvah, you do what you're supposed to. These are rayas. Then he brings that he doesn't say from where he heard, that Ramei Simcha agrees with him, and Ramei Simcha says he's mechuyev to put on tefillin. And this tshuva ends off from the Imri David saying that a person who's in a typhus ward should be given his tefillin, he's mechuyev to put on his tefillin, and if they get burnt, they get burnt, and that's how it is. Now, almost everybody who comes after him, from the Chibina's brother, Reb Moshe, Reb Yitzchak, argue with him. Now, what makes for the rich tapestry of the discussion is the rayas that they bring. Reb Moshe, for example, it's in Orach Chaim Chelik Aleph, you can look at it, it's a tshuva. He says, Neshalti al yidei hagoyin Rav Yitzchak Hutner. I was asked by Rav Hutner this Shailah. What about? Now, Rav Hutner, I'm assuming, I could be wrong. I don't think that Shailah in 1955 was an active Shailah. I assume that was Rav Hutner making interesting conversation at a meeting that they sat near each other. They ended up near a chasana by a chassan fish or something, and Rav Hutner asked him a clever question, maybe told him a good raya or something, and Rav Moshe later on went home and wrote it down. I don't that's what I imagine it is. Like it's an early tshuva. Rav Moshe was interested by the Shailah, and then Rav Moshe published the tshuva in I forgot where, in one of the maybe Hamars, and then 4 or 5 different Talmidei Chachamim wrote into Rav Moshe with kashas on his rayas and different rayas. Ahin, Aher, Reb Gifter, who was probably under 40, if I had to guess. You have to do the years exactly. Probably around 40, maybe 41, 42. Wrote him a long tshuva to argue. Moshe wrote back to him. Several other Talmidei Chachamim, and eventually you could see towards the tail end of the discussion, like by the 4th or 5th tshuva, Rav Moshe is like writing, I don't see anything new here. Let's move on. Like in the 4th tshuva, he already says, I don't see any dvarim chadashim in what you're writing, so I'll just reiterate what I said already in tshuva 1, and let's keep the train moving. But it makes for an interesting conversation. Now, I want to just, like I said, I'm going in chronological order, so let's talk about the David Misharim's tshuva. Now, the David Misharim had an older brother, the Koich I think his name, who's maybe Chazon Nachum, right? The Koich Yaakov was his father. David Misharim's father was Koich Yaakov, the Chazon Nachum was his brother. The Chazon Nachum was like his Rebbe, because the Koich Yaakov was nifter when the Chibina Rav was like a 8 or 9-year-old boy, and his primary Rebbe Muvik was his brother, the Chazon Nachum. The Chibina writes about him with glowing accolades. He died in Europe already before the war. Even I think he died basically a younger person. He never made it to Eretz Yisrael, which is why he's less known than his brother the Chibiner. But he's that Ramah of Galiciana Goin. In any case, he writes the Koich Yaakov writes himself. He says as follows: Shailah zu hispashta v'nafutza al shulchan hagdolim. It's a Shailah that's on all the Gedolim's table. Amram, that's what he writes. It's a Shailah that everyone wants to have something to say about. Everyone wants to discuss. It's an interesting Shailah. Now he has a long pilpul in Chazon Nachum to discuss it. He in Veloy v'Rafi b'Yadei, a raya like this, a raya like that. He's not actually. You could tell l'daiti that the Shailah wasn't being asked them halach l'maisa at the time, and he's writing more, whatever's going on, like what he's thinking. Now the Chibina Rav, in David Misharim, Chelik Aleph, and Tshuva Tzadik Tes, he has an interesting tshuva. Advar Shailah be'echad shel ragle eze chaylim mistabekas rachman al tzan mucher chal pipkud esarei from lias levadi beis miyochad. He has to be confined. Now, this Shailah is written in 1932. is when the Shabbat writes the Shailah. Now he has a fascinating raya, he says. First he starts handling that maybe Oinus is kilu asa mitzvah. Meaning he says, Ein laniach tefillin maybe because Oinus is kilu asa mitzvah. If it's an Oinus, it's as if you did it. So you're in nenas, you can't put on tefillin. So it's as if you did, it's as if you put on tefillin, you don't put on tefillin. So he says, it should be an Oinus that it got burnt. That's not your problem. So then you should put on tefillin and let it get burnt. So he doesn't like that. That's what the Shailah wrote. But now he has a very interesting raya. He says as follows. There's a Gemara in Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed that says like this. Tanya Reb Shimon Elazar Omer. Kol mitzvah shemasru Yisrael atzman aleim lemisa b'shas kseres hamalchus kigoyin avedis alila emumila adayini muchzekes b'gadam. The Gemara says like a yisoid. Any mitzvah that Klal Yisrael was moiser nefesh for when they were pushed against the wall, Klal Yisrael still has today very stark. Anything that they weren't moiser nefesh on it, could go in tefillin, adayin he meruf b'yadeh. Like tefillin, then adayin tefillin is meruf b'yadeh. Now, rather, there's many sources that throughout Klal Yisrael's history, there was all sorts of times when people didn't put on tefillin every day. We're rather in a good spot with tefillin, and I guess you could thank Chabad partially for that. But we're in a good spot with tefillin, pachas yaiser. But tefillin adayin he meruf b'yadeh. So he says. So the Gemara says like this. Damar of Yehuda, Tefillin tzrichen guf naki, Elisha bal knafayim. And then the Gemara brings a whole story of Elisha bal knafayim. Elisha bal knafayim was an Amira who was walking in the street when there was a time, maybe a Tana, when there was a time not to put on tefillin, Xavier not to put on tefillin. He was walking with tefillin b'roshei, and he saw a kasder echad, like a soldier, a patrolman, notice him and start chasing him. So it says he ran from the soldier, and kishihigia, when the soldier caught up to him, he quickly took the tefillin off his head. Probably, I'm assuming the shalyad could be hidden under his shirt. He took the shalrosh off his head, and he quickly put it in his hand. The soldier approaches him, and he says, what's in your hands? What are you holding? He says, kanfei yaina. I bought some dove's wings, from the store, and I'm just holding some kanfei yaina. So he opened it up, and Mary the Ganes, it was kanfei yaina in his hand. That's the story the Gemara brings. So Typhus explains, Typhus over there says, you see, from there's the Makar, Shalei Maser Atzmei Lemer Tefillin Hein. He had an opportunity to take a stand and say, I have tefillin in my hand, and I'm willing to die for that, even though you're not mechuyev to die for tefillin, but kol shalei masru nafsham, he had an opportunity to say, I have tefillin in my hand and I'm willing to die for it. He didn't. He said kamfiyani, he gave a story, and it turned into some sort of, miraculous hatzal. Says Typhus, Vice that he wasn't holding with me my nefesh tefillin. Frek, the Chibiner, he says as follows, Ulai, he was willing to be meiser nefesh tefillin, but he didn't want the tefillin to be burnt. Meaning it's einzach to put on tefillin for the mitzvah, but the lav of leisasen kein l'shem alekecha, he didn't want the Typhus police, the Roman police, to take away his tefillin and burn them. He says tzarachin l'chayr minalei la'ashash le'maser nafshei aleim demol la'elamay meiser nafshei aleh v'had le'yechmar al'atzmei limser nafshei shum denihida al'atzmei yachal limser atzmei kol makom kivin she'atefillin hay biyadei shum hachi yachash le'mer she'tefillin hein ki yarei she'akaster yinig ben bezoyin. He was not afraid about himself. For himself, he was happy to be meiser nefesh for wearing tefillin. He didn't want the tefillin to be burnt. How do you know that he wasn't meiser nefesh? This is the Chibiner's kasha. Elamaizach, the Chibiner, he says Vaistois. So he says Elamai El al Karchach Kivin the Mikol Makim Mitzvah Hayolav Lahachmer V'Lim Sanashe Amitzvah's tefillin. Vaistois from this Gemara that if he was wearing the tefillin and he was being meiser nefesh for tefillin, it wouldn't be his problem if they got burnt. He'd be able to say it's not my problem. Hashem wants them burnt. What does it have to do with me? Vaistei says from this Gemara that you could say, take the tefillin with you into the Typhus war, do your mitzvah. If they get burnt, they get burnt. That's not my problem. It's not something you're doing. This is what he wants to say. That you should be able to wear tefillin. That's what the Shabbat starts. So then he said, and then he brings a bunch of rayas that it's basically considered to be a dayan. If you arrange it so that it'll eventually be burnt, that's basically considered to be a dayan, and you can't say you can't say that. So the Shabbat Rav brings a very chikava attempt at a raya that you should be able to take the tefillin and the Typhus word. Ultimately, he concludes that you're not able to, and he brings a few rayas, that direction also, and he says you're not able to. Now, I'm skipping Rav Moshe for a second. Mechas Yitzchak in Chelek Gimel and Siman Gimel, he brings a tshuva where he really is just, there's not much new ground broken in this tshuva. He's collecting all the various different, rayas, the Khan, everyone who wrote in it. The reason why I'm quoting him is just because he's a paisik, and at the end he says, Seif Davar, and then he says that you can't take the tefillin in. I'm just bringing him. It's not so much new ground in that but he's a paisik. He's saying that I hear both tzadim. The Shailah obviously was telling him like the tzad you can put on the tefillin. And the Mechas Yitzchak saying you can't put on the tefillin. Now I want to get to Rav Moshe's tshuva for a minute. Rav Moshe's tshuva has a lot of literature on it. it was a popular tshuva to write about. Sai, the ones that are published in the Gizmaisha, Sai later on in other places, ranging from Great Gedolei Yisrael to Katlikanya, just nobodies who had something to say about it too. The Man Allegris, this is one of his favorite tshuvas to pick on. He doesn't like the Rayas. So whatever, ranging from the good, the bad, and anywhere in between. But Rav Moshe in Archaim Chelik Aleph in Siman Daled, he says, "Nishalti mehagoyin harav Yitzchak Hutner be'achad chaylo le'elein machlum mistabekes tzarich lebeis chaylim." Here's the Shailah. Then he brings as follows. Rav Moshe says 2 reasons why it should be aser. He says first he says someone who brings tefillin to a place where it's vade going to be burnt, it's as if he himself is burning it. He brings a raya from the Gemara in Shabbos and Tafkuf Zayin that says kaisvei brachas kesarfei Torah. Those who write brachas, meaning and brachas are not going to be able to be saved in case there's a fire. It's as if they themselves are burning these shemis right now when they write it. So Moshe says, you see, even over there, where it's like a shvacha chance, maybe the bracha that you're writing on some paper will eventually be in a fire and won't be able to be saved. The Gemara still says already, it's as if you're burning it already. It says, if you set something up in a way that it's going to lead to be burnt and the name's going to be destroyed, that's already on you. That's your problem. That's thing number 1 that Moshe says. And thing number 2, he says, one second, I think I did it out of order. I don't know. Okay, that's maybe number 2. Number 1 is he proves a raya from Gemara that there's a chiyuv hatzalah of the shem. It says kal v'chaymer if you're mechuyev to save shemis from being burnt on Shabbos, for sure you're mechuyev to make sure they don't fall into bad hands. Moshe brings many rayas and comes up saying like very conclusively that you can't bring the tefillin in, and the person who's in this ward shouldn't bring the tefillin. Now the first one to write to him in Mamash a few months later is somewhere the name of Rav David Singer. I don't know who that is. Maybe people know who it is. Who actually has very creative tainus against Rav Moshe. He brings a raya from a Gemara on Shabbos. This is the one that everyone's busy. He brings a raya from the Gemara on Shabbos, Taf Chof Chaf, where the Gemara says that you're not leisasin ken l'shem lekecha is only be a dayan. You're not mechuyev for the meichik hashem when it's begrama. The Gemara is talking about someone who has a shame kasav absari and he goes into the bathhouse. The Gemara says if you scrub it using soap, that's leisasin ken l'shem lekecha. But if you go into the bathhouse and it comes off on its own, that's not leisasin ken l'shem lekecha. So you see that destroying the shem Hashem, destroying tashmish kedusha and yani kedusha, it's only if you do it be a dayan. And Moshe has a long, difficult way of answering it. What do you say? So Moshe deals with it. You have to go through the whole shikar. Moshe's l'chayra, if I'm allowed to say it, l'chayra right when he shows how he dealt with it, but it's not a geshmaka teretz. It's like a doichik teretz. Now Rav Gifter, in a tshuva after this also writes kashas on Rav Moshe, different rayas, different zachin. Rav Moshe writes back to him. Then a third person writes, and there eventually Rav Moshe just like peters off. Now, what's interesting is that some of these rayas are super creative. Rav David Singal also brings a raya from a Tshuvas Ramah about saying Maitzi Shemra to save a Kehila, which is daimah to like burning a name for Shalom Bayis, like a Saita. It's like very creative, rayas that are brought Lakan. In any case, Rav Moshe, the Minchas Yitzchak, the Chabina Rav, and many others. I saw Rav Asher Weiss by Corona has a Shailah about it, and in his Sefer on Corona, the Minchas Asher on Corona, he has a Shailah about it from a doctor in London, where he passes like that. And many of the actual paiskim are saying that it's also to bring the tefillin in, although it makes for a very rich conversation and discussion. Now, I'll just leave this off as like an asterisk. I'm not going to go into this now. We actually once talked about it years ago, maybe three years ago already. I'll just mention it. There's a Shailah that the Knesset Yecheskel, of Cheskel Katzenellenberg, was one of the Gedolei HaPoskim, like from 300 years ago. He has a Shailah as follows. It's in maybe Siman Lamed Aleph, if you want to look it up. I think Siman Lamed Aleph, Lamed Beis. He has Shailah as follows. He says the story is like this. They take the shemis from the town where he is. I think the Shailah is either in Prague or Metz. The people who write about it is the Shvus Yaakov and the Knesset Yecheskel. One's in Prague, one's in Metz. I'm not sure where the Shailah is, but they have 3 or 4 tshuvas back and forth to each other. The Shailah is as follows. He says they take shemis, they gather up, like we still do today, gather up big mounds of shemis, and they bury it somewhere, right? He says, but if they did a shvacha job and they don't bury it so well, it eventually rises to the top or it gets dug up. And he says, since paper for toilet paper is very scarce, what ends up happening is the non-Jews find the shemis depot, they dig it up, and they use our old svarim for toilet paper. They take, old shmatas. Now, they were called old shmatas for a reason, right? There was like shmata paper back in the day. They were thicker, if you ever seen like a sefer from that time, and they're thicker, and they'd take them and use them, and they would sell bundles, you sell a bundle of Masechtas Yivamis for toilet paper, and the truth is that the Masechtas that were commonly learned are the ones that got destroyed. Meaning, Adiyem Azeh, if you're looking to collect like old Svarim, to find the Gemara Brachas from like a first edition from 500 years ago is almost impossible. To find the Gemara Zvachim is much easier, because it just was learned less. They survived more. So you're talking about all the iconic Svarim being collected into mounds, and the Goyim were taking them to use them for toilet paper. So the Shailah was presented as follows. Maybe the better idea would be, instead of putting the shemus in the ground and letting what happens to it, why don't we burn it? Right now, burn it ourselves. Just burn the shemus yourself. Like that, you know nothing bad's going to happen to it. You're burning it like b'derech kavod. You're burning it so that it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. Now, the Knesset Yecheskel and the Shvus Yaakov have back and forth rayas about this. It's like fascinating. The Mashal, the Knesset Yecheskel brings a raya. I don't remember who's who actually. Maybe the Shvus Yaakov brings a raya that from Shailah Melech. Shailah Melech committed suicide of a variety when he was afraid the Plishtim were going to get him. Right. So he says, you see that you're allowed to commit suicide to prevent yourself from falling into evil hands that are going to do worse to you. So maybe you're allowed to commit suicide for the Svarim, so that they don't fall in later to someone's hand who's going to do major bezayin to them. Now, and they bring rayas lakan. It's a big arichos, the chuvas. It's a very nice conversation between two tier 1 Gedali Yisrael. It's a very interesting nidin on its own. But l'chayra, it's very tali in our Shailah over here also. How do you look at your responsibility for these kisvei HaKodesh? I collect these kisvei HaKodesh, I bury them in the ground. What's my responsibility? If I know realistically that later on something's going to happen to them, what's my responsibility? Am I on the hook for that? Is that my problem? I have to see it through that doesn't happen, or my demifka the saseh. I did what I'm supposed to. I buried them in the ground. I did my chiyuv. Now, if later on someone's going to come and do something terrible, not my problem. I don't have to make another, the Shailah is very connected to our Shailah. I'm not going to go into it now, to be continued with something else related to pandemics and v'chulu.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.